You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brendan Weissel.
Sam Jane.
Michael House. And Brendan, I don't think we got to do that intro anymore from now on, do we?
I think we'll still do that intro, but Mike, you're right. Completely new overhaul of the intro, and it sounds great.
Johnny Holliday, take it away.
Our next guest has been the voice of Maryland football and men's basketball since 1979, calling more than 1,600 Terps broadcasts, including 17 bowl games and Maryland's national championship win over Indiana. We are pleased to have on Johnny Holliday for this week. Johnny, welcome on to the show. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So to get this interview kind of kick-started off here, can you kind of tell us how you got into your broadcasting career?
That's a pretty tough question because I got into it by mistake. I was doing a couple of other things. I didn't know what I wanted to do, first of all. I was out of high school and I played football, baseball, and basketball in high school. And so didn't have a lot of money to go to college. So I did other jobs. I delivered parts for a Chevrolet company. I worked in a mint store. I did like 3 or 4 of the jobs. So I went to visit my grandfather in a small little Georgia town called Unadilla. You guys have never heard of Unadilla, I guarantee you. Nobody else has either. And I'm working in his drugstore, stocking shelves. And I went up there primarily to play baseball. They have a little amateur baseball league consisting of small Georgia towns. And there was a guy in his drugstore from a radio station in Perry, Georgia. You ever hear of Perry, Georgia? No, you never heard of Perry, Georgia? And so my grandfather says, I want you to meet my grandson. He's a disc jockey. So I'm going, what? I was entered into a contest as a joke by my best buddy, but I wasn't a disc jockey. So the guy says, I'm looking for somebody from my station. You want to come talk to me? Yeah, sure. Went up the next day. I read a few pieces of copy and commercials, and he says, can you start Monday? I said, yeah, sure. $32 a week. That's not a lot of money. No, 32. And I paid my grandfather $10 a week for living with him. So I'm making $22. And that's how it started. I did that for 4 months. Then I went back to Miami, which is my home. And I made the rounds of all the stations, thinking after 4 months' experience, I was the hottest disc jockey in America. And nobody would even talk to me. And finally, the R&B station said, listen to my tape. They said, you're wanting to relocate. We bought a station in Rochester, New York. We're going to take over. In about 3 months, we'll put you on here. So I was the only white guy at a black station at that time to get more experience. And that's how I started, strictly by accident.
So growing up, you never had any, you'd watch broadcasts, you liked them, you never really had any intention of getting into broadcasting or audio work, nothing at all.
I wanted to be a coach, and I wanted to teach because we had great coaches when I was in high school. And these guys really were great role models for us. And I wanted to be like my baseball coach and my defensive backfield coach, Jack Clark. Because Jack Clark came to school every day wearing a pair of khakis, white T-shirt, whistle around his neck, baseball cap, Chuck Taylor, low-cut, black Converse, and had 2 classes a day. One was study hall. The other was the monitor duty in the lunchroom. I want to be just like Coach Clark. But I never had a chance to do that. So if I wasn't doing this, I would be doing that.
So when you started with radio, obviously you didn't start in sports, but
No.
Was your intention always to kind of transition into sports? And then how did that process happen? Take me behind the scenes for that.
Yeah, I started off as a disc jockey, and I made my mark as I eventually got to be the #1 guy in the country in top 40 radio, only because I was working at great stations, Cleveland, New York City, San Francisco. But I knew that having played football, baseball, and basketball, if I could ever do sports, I would certainly be interested in it. So when I got to Cleveland, I would spot the Cleveland Browns for the opposition's radio. And the Dallas Cowboys would come to town. A guy named Frank Lever was their broadcaster. And he gave me $25 a week to spot for him. And I watched the way he did a game. He wasn't over the top, going ballistic with a play where a guy gains 2 yards and a third down. He let the game dictate his enthusiasm, his how far up he could get. And I kind of put that in the back of my mind. I said, I can do this. This is pretty cool. And I spotted for the Green Bay Packers. I spotted for the New York Giants, for Schenkel, Pat Summerall. All these major guys would come in town, and I was the Browns spotter. Then I became the public address announcer for the Cleveland Browns. Before I went to New York City, I didn't do any sports in New York. When I got to San Francisco, I had a chance to do a lot more. And I was still a disc jockey, still doing 6 to 10 in the morning or 3 to 6 in the afternoon. And then the interesting thing, and you guys in broadcasting, if you want to get into broadcasting, never say no when somebody offers you a job. Like I can't tell you the number of times somebody would call me and say, "Hey, Johnny, you've done," "Oh, yeah, I've done that," and hadn't done it. I said, yes. Then I worried later on, how am I going to do this? I've never done this before. But I got by every roadblock that was thrown in front of me. But I knew that I could always do sports and do play-by-play.
Can you give us an example of one of those jobs you took with having no experience?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had a book that came out 10 years ago called From Rock to Jock, and I talk all about this. Gymnastics. I get a call. This guy says, "You've done gymnastics?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, yeah." I couldn't tell you a mat from a pool. I had no idea. But I sat down with a Maryland gymnastics coach and went through all the different terminology. And he had a yellow pad. He said, "Okay," he shows me video. This is this, this is this, this is this. So when I got down to Florida to do this event, at least I had an idea. Then I had 2 analysts. And if you have good analysts, all you have to do is feed the analyst and let them do the major work for you. So I did it the first year. The woman was a former gymnast from Stanford. The guy was a former coach at Oklahoma. They had to know within about the first 15 minutes of working with me, this guy doesn't know a damn thing about gymnastics. But I knew enough to get by. So we do the show. It's on national television. I said, "Okay, that was fun. Don't ever ask me back again." The next year, the phone rings. "Could we speak to Mr. Gymnastics? We'd like to have you come back again." And you're kidding me. So for 8 straight years, I did that in Florida. That was one case. Another case, we're at the Olympics in Sarajevo for ABC Radio. And I did 8 Olympic Games. The assignment sheet says Johnny Holliday women's figure skating. I grew up in Florida. I was just skating a lot down in Florida. So I go to my boss and I said, "Hey, I don't know anything about women's figure skating." He said, "But you can do it, can't you?" I said, "Well, yeah, get the hell out. Get out of here. Get out of here." So I sit down with the analyst, who's a former gold medalist, and she says, "Here's what we're going to do. Fred Manfred. You guys have heard of Fred Manfred, the Orioles broadcaster a couple of years ago? He's the anchor in the studio. So we're at the site. And I got a yellow pad. She writes down the American contestants. She writes down what the strengths are for these girls. She says, when they throw it to us, I'm going to point to one of these names. And you pick up in the name, then I'm going to point to what I think is the strength of this skater. Okay. So Manfred says, "Let's go to Scandaria, Johnny Holliday and Carol Jenkins with an update on women's figure skate." "Fred, thank you very much. Carol, I really like the chances," and she's pointing to Tanya Harding. "I like the chances of Tanya Harding, mainly because," and she's pointing to Sao Chow, "because she's excellent in the Sao Chow." And Carol says, "Johnny, you're exactly right. I do like her chances." Back to you, Fred. I'd never done figure skating in my life. Another one, boxing at the Olympics. The assignment, Johnny Holliday and former heavyweight champion Ken Norton will do boxing. So I'm sitting there. I mean, I had gone to boxing matches with my dad in Florida, so I knew a little bit about it, but I wasn't an excellent, blow by blow guy. So I did every Sugar Ray Leonard championship fight on radio. No experience, none, but I did every single one. And there's a whole bunch of other things. Get the book. It's all in the book.
So as you're switching through all these different sports you're covering, do you find as the more reps you get, it becomes easier to cover a sport that you're unfamiliar with?
Yeah, exactly. I think, the thing about the sports that I wasn't familiar with, after I did it for a while, I kind of enjoyed it. I thought it was kind of fun. You're doing something really different. I covered the downhill in Calgary, in Sydney, Australia. I covered the Jamaican bobsled team at the Olympics, also in Calgary, in Albertville, Canada. And you really kind of get into it after. I mean, you have to, because you don't want to make a fool of yourself and, fall flat in your face. But one of the most interesting thing was I got a call to do the ACC baseball championships in Greenville, South Carolina. And my analyst, number one, was Terry Gannon, who today is on the Golf Channel. The other analyst was Larry Conley. He played basketball at Kentucky. Terry Gannon played at NC State, and I covered his games when Maryland played NC State. I had never done play-by-play baseball, so I do the weekend series of the ACC championships. The next call, the next week, the television station says, we want you to go do the Orioles game at Cleveland. So my second or third game was a big league game. Guys worked years to get to the major leagues. I never did a minor league game. Stepped right in, ACC championship, and then Major League Baseball. Just goes to show you. Right place, right time.
Kidding. Terry Gannon's great in the 30 for 30 about NC State.
Yeah, he's really good. And here was two basketball guys, and I said to these guys, what do you know about baseball? Nothing. What do you know? I said, I've never done. So we got three of us having never done baseball doing the ACC championship. It was great.
That's great.
It was
what
good.
Was your relation?
He was a good basketball player too. Both those guys.
Yeah.
Conley was All-American at Kentucky, and and Terry Gannon played at NC State.
Yeah. One guy who did know about baseball you worked with, I want to ask about your relationship with Ted Williams. Because I saw, you went, I think you started obviously with the Senators, right? Was that? And then you did the pregame radio show. What was that like?
Ted Williams was bigger than life. He was very intimidating. He's about 6'4", 6'5". And here I am, 5'8". So I'm doing the pregame show. And I would do an interview with him on the pregame show, plus a Senators player. Then I would do a player from the opposing team. And he couldn't have been nicer. I mean, he was really, really nice and very matter of fact, and no messing around with Ted Williams. And one story I love to tell is I had a charity softball team, and we played all around the area, raising money for different charities. And we had a doubleheader one night. And so the next day I'm sitting in the dugout waiting for him to come out. And he sits down and we tape the pregame show. And he walks away and he stops at the end of the dugout and says, "Hey, Holliday, how'd you do in that charity softball game last night?" And I said, "I think I went like 9 for 14. And he says, "In slow pitch?" I said, "Yeah, grab a bat. Let me see your stance." So here's Ted Williams, one of the greatest hitters of all time, asking me to show him my stance. So I get the bat in my hand. No, give me the bat. Give me the bat. I want you to get that show. I want you to get the show. He's demonstrating how I should hit in slow pitch softball. If I could have had a picture of that to show to my dad, my father would have gone nuts. He was great.
How do you kind of build camaraderie with those guys, those color guys when you're in the booth and you get a new assignment and maybe it's a guy you haven't worked with before? How do you kind of build that camaraderie?
Uh, I think in baseball, I had Ray Knight. We were doing the national pre and post game for 13 years. And he was probably the best analyst that I've ever had for baseball. And he'd been a manager. He was the MVP of the World Series in 1986 when the Mets beat the Boston Red Sox. He was a hitting coach. He was everything. And he was the nicest guy. So you basically, I think the turning point with him one night was we were early in the season. The Nationals were getting just knocked all over the place, losing game after game. So about the fifth game into the season, first time I've ever worked with him, he reached over during the telecast and, made some kind of a gesture, and he brushed across my coat. And so I said to him, "Don't touch the coat." And he stopped. He says, "Don't what?" I said, You just touched my coat. And we're on television. I don't want you to touch my coat. He started laughing like crazy. From that point on, we had no problem. 13 years. And he would never he would never correct me on something that I said. But during a timeout, he'd say to me, "What the hell were you talking about? We don't do that in the major league." No. I said, "Well, I thought," he says, "No," but he never did that on camera. So anytime I made a comment or set him up, he would always go along with it until we had a break and then say, "No, that's not the way we do it." He was tremendous. Well, and right now in football, we've got Steve Suter. Now we got Lamont Jordan, Maryland's all-time leading rusher, on the sidelines. And both these guys know that they played at Maryland. They both were tremendous players, all conference, in the record book. They can say whatever they want to say. The only thing that I ask for is when they break that huddle, that's when you got to stop so I can set the scene. Who's left, who's right, what the formation is, the down, the distance. And then when the play is over, let me just make the call and who makes the tackle. And you guys got it from there. So, and I think they both know that I love Maryland. I want these guys to win every single game, no matter what sport I'm doing. If I'm doing a women's basketball game or basketball for the men or football, this is my team. This is my school. So we all have the same feeling.
To roll it back just a little bit, you mentioned obviously now you're doing all the Maryland broadcasts, but how did you end up actually starting doing the Maryland broadcasts?
1979, before you guys were born. I was at WMAL, and they had the rights to the Maryland broadcast. And Tim Brandt, a Maryland graduate, had moved on to do television. And so they said to me, "You've done some sports." I said, "Yeah, I've done some sports, yeah. How'd you like to take over Maryland?" "Yeah, sure." So I took over Maryland in 1979. I'd done Navy for 1 year before that. And then in California, before I came here, the last day that I was in San Francisco, I did the Stanford Cal game. And then the next day I flew back here. And that's how I got the job at WMAL. And they had the rights for about probably 10 or 15 years, I guess. Then they lost them. Then I left the station to work directly for the school. So I'm an employee of the University of Maryland. I wish I got paid like the coaches, but I don't.
So that's my question. You know, the year when after Len Bias had passed away,
Yeah.
Or not after, but shortly thereafter, there was the Maryland didn't play on national television. Like we had Gary Williams on, and he was talking about how, they weren't broadcasted on TV. Did you feel an added responsibility? Was that a really weird season for you?
Yeah.
Like, because you probably had a lot more listeners tuning in to check out the turf.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Well, Gary had a great line. And he is one of the most intriguing people that I've ever met. We're probably closer now than we were close when he was coaching too. But now that he's not, it's a whole different feeling between the two of us. he made a comment one time. Greg Manning was doing the games with us, and Greg played with Albert King and Buck Williams for Lefty back in the early '80s. And so one of our pregame shows, Kerry says, you're on probation, so the only way people are going to be able to follow Maryland basketball is by listening to Johnny and Greg Manning. You guys better do good. Yeah, Coach, we're going to try. And you're right. I think there was a little bit more added pressure because, nobody's watching. A lot of people watch and turn the sound down, but today it's difficult to sync it up because you got a 7-second or 8-second delay. So back then, for those years, we were it. That was it. So I think it was more pressure, and I think we enjoyed it tremendously, being the eyes and the ears of Maryland fans. Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, Gary leads the program into a rebuild, and they make it all the way to the national championship and win it. And you called that game. And when you're calling the game, such as the national championship or any of the bowl games you've covered, are you ever kind of in awe, like, wow, this is kind of cool? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was, just to get there. When I think back of the teams that they beat to get to Indiana, the Connecticuts, the Kentuckys, it was like Kansas, Murderers Row, just to get to the championship game. And then you're in Atlanta, and you're in a magnificent Georgia Dome. And we're sitting directly across from the Maryland bench area where the broadcasters were. And there were times before the game, and I think during the game, during a timeout, I'd say to Chris Knocky, who was doing the games with me, do you believe this? There's two teams still standing, Indiana and us, and we're getting the chance to do a national championship game. Not a lot of guys have that opportunity. And when it got down to the final seconds and the clock is ticking down, and then I see they start to celebrate on the sidelines, and Chris Wilcox is rubbing his hand through Gary's hair, and Juan Dixon's pushing him, and stuff that would have never happened in practice, but they're all just going bananas. And I got choked up. I got a little tears in my eyes, and my voice cracked a little bit, when the final seconds ticked off. And people have asked me, did you rehearse anything? Did you have anything written down what you were going to say? No, nothing. The only thing I can say, and it was on the verge of breaking up, and the kids have done it. Just thinking how hard they worked to get there and how hard Gary coached. And not one single high school All-American was on that team. Not one. They were all just a bunch of guys that just blended together and had the same kind of chip on their shoulder that Gary Williams had.
Do you usually not rehearse the big moments before they happen? Do you usually just go into it and let it come naturally?
I've never rehearsed a moment. Every opening we do for football, every opening we do for basketball, the opening of the broadcast, nothing is written down. Nothing. I have no idea what I'm going to say until, boom, they say go. Then I go. Same for baseball. Ray Knight never knew what I was going to ask him. We knew format-wise what we're going to do in a particular segment, but he had no idea what the first question is going to be. And I think it's kind of interesting that way because you got analysts with you that are really good, that have played the game, and nothing's going to catch them off guard. They're going to be able to answer anything that you throw at them. That's what I tell Suter. That's what I tell Lamont, what I tell Walt Williams and Chris Knocky. Pretty simple. Pretty simple.
How do you balance, you mentioned kind of having a love for Maryland and wanting them to win every game. How do you balance that with also, you're covering the game and for a national audience kind of?
I think anybody that tunes into one of our games, they know who I'm for, number one. They know I'm not pulling for Michigan. I'm not pulling for Ohio State. I'm not pulling for Penn State. But I think also something I've always done is I've given the other team credit. I don't like to be labeled a homer which I probably, well, of course I am, because I'm from Maryland. But I think if the other team is doing something, you have to give them credit. And not every foul on us is a bad foul. Not every call that goes against us is a bad. You can't do that because you lose any kind of credibility. So I've always given the other team credit and always said good things about them. And in the back of my mind, hoping that they don't come back and win this game, to be honest with you.
What about like situations, to follow up what Brendan said? Because you're employed by the university, it's different. But you're such a respected voice that people tune in to listen. Like when situations, like I know you had a weekly show with DJ Durkin, and then situations like with him happened, or other things that it's kind of impossible to, stay away from almost. Like,
yeah.
How do you handle those type of things? And I'm sure you saw what happened with like Kevin Brown, for example, for the Orioles. Like, is there stuff that happens like that in radio that you've heard or that you've seen about?
I thought the thing with Kevin Brown was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, here, having done baseball, he's reading what the Orioles put out. This is their notes. So if they're going to suspend him, why not suspend the person that put the notes out, that put the stuff that he's only being a broadcaster and being honest. And he didn't make this up himself. This was already printed out. The good thing about Maryland, nobody, and I've worked for a lot of athletic directors, nobody has ever told me, don't do this, don't do that. Nobody has ever in 45 years questioned anything that I did. I think they know that I'm not going to go off the beaten track. I'm not going to do something that's going to get somebody in trouble or say the wrong thing. No way. But with coaches, it's pretty tough when you become close to a coach. In the days of Mark Duffner, for example, Bobby Ross, I love Bobby Ross. Joe Krivak and I became the closest of friends. And then when Mark Duffner, tremendous guy, we played golf together, had dinner at each other's house together. And it's very difficult. And then you've got to realize it's a business, but you can still stay friends with him. Mark Turgeon lives 5 blocks away from me in Kensington. I see him at 9 o'clock Mass at Holy Redeemer all the time. Still one of my dear friends, even though he's not coaching at the University of Maryland. Not my decision, school's decision. And you have to understand that. And sometimes it's difficult. You can't let your emotions get involved, but you can still stay friends with all the guys that you've been working with and respected for all these years. Not easy.
How did you handle the Jordan McNair situation?
Very delicately. The fact that I wasn't there, so I don't know exactly what happened. But in taking pieces from players and coaches and other people that were there, we kind of did the best we could to say what an absolute horrendous tragedy it was. And had there been the right kind of facilities there, that they may have been able to save the young guy. But there wasn't. And since that time, Maryland has instituted the cooling tables and so forth. They've done a lot of things to make sure that never happens again. Just terrible. And the same with Len Bias. When Len Bias died, it was, you had to be honest. It was pretty tough to try to get around that. And I knew him quite well, knew his family well, and you always sit back on the anniversary of his death and say, how good could this guy have been had he stayed with the Boston Celtics? And how good could they have been? And he was just an absolute phenomenal basketball player, offensively and defensively. And one of the toughest things I ever did, I sang at his funeral. His mom asked me to sing. And having done theater, I said to her, Mrs. Bias, I don't know. I don't know if I can do that or not. She says, well, you sing in theater. I said, theater's different. When you're doing a musical comedy and there's 800 people watching you perform and you're doing happy-go-lucky songs, that's different than singing the Lord's Prayer at your son's funeral. And she said, I think Leonard would be happy if you did that. Oh, my God. I mean, I almost went to pieces. And I got through the song. And at the very end of the song, a lot of tears came out. And watching Mrs. Bias behind the casket coming down the aisle at the chapel, and she looks up and she blows a kiss to me up in the choir loft. And then I went to pieces after that. So it was, there's a lot of emotion that guys go through doing games that the average person doesn't know. And it's tough. I mean, if you see a Maryland player laying on the floor or laying on the court with some kind of a gruesome injury, you feel that, just like the fans do, just like you guys do, and just like the fans do. It's tough. It's tough.
How do you balance? You're doing all these different things at Maryland, and you're also having so many opportunities kind of outside of the university. How do you balance all those opportunities you have for yourself? And with you have a priority. Obviously, you're known very much for being voice of Maryland, and you're doing all these other things. How do you balance all that?
Very delicately. Not easy. Not easy. Maryland has the priority. Like when I was doing the Nationals and I took over that job, I said, I've got Maryland football on Saturdays. Well, you do the games, we'll have somebody fill for you. So Maryland has always been number one for me. And there were times when I was doing theater and the show in September was extended to October, and we're in football games. So I would fly back from a game at Chapel Hill, a noon game, land at BWI, go right to the theater and be on stage for an 8:30 show. And one time at Toby's Dinner Theater in Columbia, the flight back from Clemson was delayed because we fly charter. And the charter flight hadn't picked us up on time. And we got a sellout crowd at night to watch the show. So when I land, there's a Harford County Police, whatever county Columbia's in, had a policeman waiting for me, picked me up, took me to the theater, and they made me go out before the show to explain to the people why we're starting an hour late. And I said, I had this Maryland football game this afternoon, and I think we had beaten Duke, and everybody starts applauding. Yeah, you beat Duke. Yeah, it's different in basketball, but we beat them in football too. But it is tough to balance it sometimes, but it always works out. Always works out.
You've talked about your experiences in theater a little bit. Was that something you got into before your broadcasting career, or something that kind of, I guess, the performative aspect of broadcasting got you into?
It's interesting. I was at a party one night in Cleveland, and I was a young, I guess, 21-year-old disc jockey. And the guy from the local theater said to me, have you ever done anything? And I said, yeah, I did some high school. That's all. He said, I'm producing these summer shows. We're bringing in big names to take leading roles in these musicals. We're bringing in Dion to do a show. We're bringing in Paul Peterson. We're bringing in Bobby Vinton. We're bringing in all these big names. You would be perfect for Finian's Rainbow. And I said, what role? The leprechaun. Okay, the leprechaun. So I'm doing the role of the leprechaun. Now I realized that all those people that came to see the show, which was 1,000 people a night, that's all 1,000 potential listeners to your radio show the next day. And that's why I did it, to promote myself to a whole different audience. And so I did 2 shows in Cleveland, nothing in New York, 1 show in San Francisco, and I've done about 22 of them here in Washington. I was lucky to I did the first show in the Corey Smith Performing Arts Center when it opened. They did Music Man with Maryland theater, dance, and music majors. And 3 of us were from the outside. And so I did Harold Hill and that. And we did that for 3 weeks, 8 shows a week, with 1,000 people at every show. And on the Saturday, we'd have a football game, and then we'd do a show at night. So it was all kind of cross promotion. And I figured maybe 750,000 people have seen me do shows in theater. And that's a lot of listeners if they all tune in. That's the reason I did it. And I liked it too. I enjoyed it.
We have a theater guy on right now, Michael House.
Yeah, that's right.
Big theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think all those skills kind of, go hand in hand with one another. And, when you're giving something to an audience and they can only hear what you're saying, they can't watch the game. All they have is your voice and what you're saying. What strategies do you employ for maybe word choice or descriptive language to, give the audience the best picture in their mind when there's only words?
One of my friends was named Eddie Walker, and he was blind since birth, never saw. And he called me when I first started doing games back in the early 80s. And he'd say, gosh, you guys played well. He said, I really liked that in the third quarter when that guy went 85 yards for it. I said, I'm thinking to myself, well, he never saw the game. And I said, he said, I was listening to you on the radio. He said, man, you made that call. I knew exactly where he went to the left corner of the end zone. He caught the pass at the 45-yard line, dodged a couple of guys right down the sideline. And from that point on, I realized if I can be descriptive, if I can broadcast for one person, it would be a person that can't see. And that's why I try. A lot of guys don't do this, but I try to let the people know where the down and distance is, what side of the hash mark it's on, which end of the field Maryland's going to, how much time on the clock, what's the score. Score, very important. Who makes the tackle, who makes the key block, and what the next down and distance is. I try to paint it as best as I can. And a lot of guys, if you listen on the radio, a lot of the play-by-play guys will say 3 receivers to the left, 1 receiver to the right. I try to say who those 3 receivers are. Jones to the left, Ty Felton to the left. And in the slot is this guy. But Corey Dyches is to the right. Instead of saying 3 guys and 1 guy. Well, who are they? So I think that's what I try to do anyhow. And hopefully it works.
Just a random question. How does you got to get in on the TV money, Mr. Holliday, because the TV announcer money is where it's at, I'm telling you. But I'm just wondering, how do you see the future of radio occurring in terms of, it's kind of slowly dwindling as we head to a more streaming services. Do you think that this is something that will continue, or?
Yeah, I think you're always going to have radio. You're always going to have people in their cars, okay? You're always going to have people working at home that don't have televisions. You're always going to have people that want to hear the local guys. And every school, that's the guy you want to listen to. In North Carolina, it used to be Woody Durham. He was the voice of North Carolina. And everywhere you went, it was Woody Durham this, Woody Durham that. So I don't think radio is ever going to go away. Sure, you can stream it. You can watch it if you got a computer or your iPhone or whatever. But there's nothing like, and I've always been more in favor of the local guys know more than the national guys know. Because I've done both. I've gone into a city and done a game and know nothing about either team except what the press releases show me. And they give you a piece of paper, you look at it, you do the game, you don't care who wins or loses. You're right down the middle. But I think people like to identify with that local guy that they know is for their school and knows all about the coaches, knows all about the players. And that will never go away, I don't think. And, you talked about the money in television. Well, I've done television for a lot of years. And I think television, you don't have to work as hard because the picture's right there. So all you have to do is just add a couple of comments to the picture. And I'd rather work for one school and be associated with that one school than I would having to go game by game every week. To me, that doesn't interest me. And I had some chances a long time ago to leave Maryland and go to a network, and I chose not to do that because this is the perfect job for me.
Right. So you've been around for so many years. This can be a tough question, I'm sure. What's the funniest story that you can remember from your time, either in football, basketball, whatever it may be?
The funniest, most of them I can't tell you guys on the air. But there was one with Gary Williams, and Ralph Regan was coaching at Maryland, and he had just turned the football program around, and we're playing somebody, and there's a timeout, and Ralph had just entered the arena, so the public address announcer introduces Ralph Regan. Here's our head football coach. His team's off to a great start. Ralph Regan. Well, Gary leaves the timeout huddle, comes racing over to me, and in my face is going, John, who gave you permission to introduce Regan? This is a basketball game, not a football game. Who gave you permission to do that? I said, Coach, the PA announcer is down there. Oh, then Gary went down and read him the riot act. Funny stories. Well, when I first started, I guess it was indoctrination. I don't know, but they wrapped me up in a mattress at the Clemson game, and they thought it was pretty funny to wrap me up in a mattress while they went out to have dinner, and I couldn't get out of the mattress until they came back. They had it all taped up. That was the first year I did the game. I don't think there's been any real funny things happen. Oh, with Ron Vanderlinden, he was always a little leery of being on of what he didn't want to promote the other team. So we're taping his television show one day, and we just got beat by Carolina, pretty bad. So he says to me, I don't want to mention the word North Carolina on this telecast. I said, well, what are we going to do? We just got beat by Carolina. Well, if we mention Carolina, that's promoting North Carolina. So can you just say we got beat by the guys in the blue and white? I said, you're not serious, are you? Yeah. Or can you just say we got beat by the guys that we played a game south of Virginia? Yeah, he was serious. So I did it. Yeah, I know. I did it that way. And I said, okay, that's fine. That I thought was pretty funny.
That's like Michigan and Ohio State, the team down north.
Yeah, so. Exactly. And he said,
stupidest thing ever.
That's promoting the other team. I said, look, if we mentioned North Carolina, we just played North Carolina. You got to mention it. He didn't want
like Ohio State. Ohio State will go by the week they play Michigan and X out all the M's on the campus. And the funniest thing is when they miss an M. So like they'll spell a word and then they miss an M in that word. And that's like, it's like you're promoting them more by doing that than by just saying Michigan.
Oh, I know. I mean, I guess coaches have certain,
yeah, they're weird.
I don't know. I go along with, and Mike Loxley is the easiest guy you'd ever want to work with. I mean, when we do our show every Thursday night at Grill Marks on Baltimore Avenue, and it's just a couple of guys sitting there talking football for an hour. He has no idea what I'm going to ask him, but he's great. He is really. Gary was tremendous. Mark Turgeon was tremendous. Kevin Willard is very, very good. So I've been lucky to work with a lot of good guys. Friesian was it? Oh yeah, I can tell you a Friesian story. We're at the Outback Steakhouse, and so the waitress would come up and say, "Do you want the usual, Coach?" He'd say, "Yeah, just give me the usual." So I get an iced tea, and he's got this other drink there, and so he sipped the drink, and as the show went along, he got looser and looser. And she kept coming over and filling up the drink. And I mean, he wasn't, but he was funny. He was really, really funny. And we had a great time. Great time.
Took the edge off.
Yeah, exactly. I said, what's in the drink there? It's good, isn't it? I said, I guess it is. I don't know. he was great.
How do scheduling those shows and getting a show with those coaches work? Does every football coach get a show? How does that process go down?
Yeah. Every coach I've done a show with, going back to Jerry Claiborne. So it depends upon where we do it. Some shows were done at the coach's office. Most of them done at a restaurant. Like we did Outback Steakhouse. We did Looney's last year. This year we do Grill Marks in football. We do Lido's in basketball. And the coach shows up. They bring 2 players every week. We have a former player on, and the audience can come and visit, and everybody's available. And Mike and Kevin both, they work the house. They're friends with everybody. They greet everybody. They talk with everybody. It's really nice. Really nice.
So to close out this interview, we're going to move into our rapid fire round. We do this with every single guest. We're going to ask you a couple questions. You give us your best response. So to start off, what is the favorite game you've ever covered?
National championship.
National championship. That's a good one. Favorite play
you knew that was coming, didn't you? You knew that.
Yeah,
was coming. Yeah. That's too easy.
I was hoping there might have been like a little sleeper one you had there.
Yeah, national championship, and anytime we beat Duke.
That's another pretty good one right there.
Yeah.
Favorite play you've ever witnessed?
Favorite play I've ever witnessed? Football or basketball?
Either.
Okay, basketball, Drew Nicholas. The shot against UNC Asheville to get us advanced in the NCAA tournament. When he hit a shot at the buzzer, we had like 4 seconds to go the length of the court. And you can watch that play on YouTube. And he hit the shot fading away right through the net. We win by 1. And he heads for what he thought was the locker room, kept on running. But Maryland's locker room is that way. So the guys had to come get him and bring him back. And in football, probably they won over Miami in the Orange Bowl in 1984, down 31-0. Touchdown pass to Greg Hill. I think he had 2 or 3 that day. That's a couple of them right there.
How about the favorite interview or best interview you've ever had?
Best interview in that's tough because every one of these have been tremendous. Probably Boomer. Boomer would be good in in football. Torrey Smith was great in football. In basketball, Greg Manning was tremendous. Albert King, Juan Dixon, Steve Blake. On the current team, Jamar Young is great. So, I mean, there's so many good ones in football and basketball.
How about your favorite Maryland coach to talk to?
All of them.
All of them?
No, I got to take that back. There was a couple that I wasn't crazy about, but the favorite one to talk to, Lefty was interesting. Lefty was, he was really, really good. Jerry was phenomenal. Mark Turgeon was the salt of the earth. Willard is really, really good. And in football, the Bobby Ross, Friedgen, Duffner, and that'd be about it in football.
How about your worst performance in the broadcast booth you remember or a call that you regret?
Oh, the worst performance. Well, it was probably the worst performance and the worst conditions. We're down at Florida International, and they have a portable broadcast booth that they bring in for the games. And they set it up on the concourse on the opposite side of the press box. So we get to the game. I go to the press box and I say, where's the Maryland booth? Oh, you see that white? I said, over there? So we walk all the way around into this portable booth, separated by a little piece of cardboard with their broadcast team on the other side. Now, there's no air inside this little broadcast booth. It starts to rain. The windows fog up. So we send Scott McBrien out. It was so small, Scott McBrien could not get in the booth with us. So he's outside. And it's a monsoon. The windows are fogged up. They keep playing. We have no idea where the ball is. No idea. We know it's Maryland's got the ball somewhere down here. So it was like we had to guess. We had no idea. We said we think the Terps have got the ball somewhere in FIU territory. And then Scott McBrien would chime in because he's outside. He says, I think it's a 45-yard line. Then he'd come back and say, no, it's the 10-yard line. Well, there's a big difference in 45 to the 10-yard line. So that was one. We had no idea what was going on. And then there was another game I did in basketball down at Florida State. And I got a real bad pain in my back. I mean, it was so bad, I had to sit down in the hallway before the game started. Sciatica had hit me. And so I'm sitting down, and a policeman comes by and says, you okay? This is about 30 minutes now before we start the broadcast. And I said, my back is killing me. So they put me in the ambulance, and they're going to take me to the hospital. I said, no, you can't. I got to broadcast the game. So I had to sign a release saying that they were not responsible if something happened to me. And they give me a Percocet to take the pain away. And they give me about 8 or 9 towels to sit on to take the strain off my back. So Gary comes over before the game. He says, how you doing? I said, I'm doing okay. He said, you got some pain medication in you? I said, yeah, I got quite a few pills in me now to take the edge off. He said, I want to hear this broadcast. This ought to really be good. It had to be terrible, but I got through it.
You were a disc jockey at one point. We talked about it. How about your favorite song or album to play on the radio?
Favorite song or album? It might have been the early Beatles album they came out with in '64. And the favorite song might have been Sly Stone. At that time, I want to thank you for being, what was the song about? Everyday People. Everyday People. And Sly and I became good friends in San Francisco. He was one of my buddies out there.
Well, Johnny, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Oh, this was fun, guys. This was fun. Congratulations to you guys for doing this. This is
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's very special.
Football's play-by-play announcer just told all of you some amazing stories about the past, present, future, whatever it may be. Johnny was a phenomenal guest, and we were so lucky to have him on and to hear his great calls the rest of the season of the football team, who moved to 3-0, guys. Defeated Virginia on Friday night in a pretty questionable game at first that turned into a pretty dominating win. Brendan, what did you see from the football team? Tell us what your thoughts were about the Terps win over the Cavaliers.
I mean, was there really any doubt that Maryland wouldn't be 3-0? I mean, you look at the schedule at the beginning of the year, it's pretty much a lock for the past couple of seasons that Maryland's going to finish 3-0, but they surely made it interesting in the Charlotte game and the Virginia game. I thought overall Maryland played a very solid game. Didn't look great for the first quarter. We said the same thing last week, but overall I thought they played a very good game.
Mike, I think that one thing we can talk about is the slow starts, obviously, falling down 14-0. a huge 48-yard touchdown pass on a coverage bust, and then the flea flicker that resulted to put Virginia up 14-0. Same thing happened with Charlotte, albeit in a different way. What do you think about that type of start that Maryland's had?
It's going to be important for Maryland, especially now this week we're heading into conference play, that they start the game in a flow. And then I also think that their offensive play calling also has to get into that flow, because it feels like just watching the offense the past 2 games that they start out a little disjointed, don't really know what they want to do. Then they completely hone in on doing one thing. With Charlotte, it was the running game, and with Virginia, it was a little more Talia throwing the ball. They start to hone in on one thing, and it starts to move the offense. But they got to figure that out early and come into the game with that game plan.
Yeah, friend of the pod, Jay-Sean Jones, really kind of had the big spark with the deep touchdown pass after the kick return, which obviously was a huge thing.
I said it last week. Jay-Sean Jones, no matter where he is on the field, making a huge impact, and he had a hell of a game on Friday night.
Yeah, I mean, he dominated, and I thought that was something good to take away, was the deep ball from Talia looked much better on point. And the deep ball for Virginia's quarterback looked good at first, too. Obviously, through 2 possessions was a perfect 5 for 5 for 109 yards. But then they really started to lock in. Tarheeb still with a huge day, 2 picks on the day. And then the rest of the way, Virginia's quarterback completed fewer than 54% of his passes for just 155 yards the rest of the way, according to the Diamondback. And Tarheeb still really kind of turned that switch. But as we head into next week, when the Terps will take on Michigan State, their first road game of the season, Testudo Talk will have you want more on that matchup, but just in general, Mike, you have the air game of Michigan State, which has been pretty solid this year. What are your thoughts on the secondary?
Air game is scary because that means they got to play smart football, which means avoiding penalties. And
which is not something they do.
It's the case for them the past 2 years now. It has not been that. Last year they led the Big Ten in penalties and penalty yardage. This year, right now, it's been cleaned up a little bit, but they still have the 4th most penalty yards a game in the Big Ten this season. So when it comes to throwing the ball, that comes with a lot of PI, holdings. You got to play clean, smart football.
Yeah, and Michigan State, pretty much you have to play clean and you'll win. That's kind of my take on it. Like, don't beat yourself, like what Coach Ralph Friedgen said. Let the other team make the mistakes. And I think that's something that maybe Maryland can try to do to, get to 4-0.
I also think this might not be the best version of Michigan State football that they could have seen. Obviously, this past weekend had a terrible loss. They're dealing with a lot of stuff inside the locker room with their coach not being there. So there's a lot going on in that program.
Right. We're recording on Monday, and Mel Tucker was just notified that he'd be fired. So obviously a pretty unruly situation down there at Michigan State with everything going on.
Regardless, I think it's still a quality Big Ten program.
Yeah.
Regardless if they have the head coach, regardless if they have the people who recruited them. Maryland still has to go in an away game, try to win their first Big Ten game of the year. I think regardless of what you're going to say about the coach and everything else about how Michigan State is this year, this is going to be a tough game for Maryland, considering the way they've started and considering the fact that Michigan State got blown out last weekend, and they're going to fight back.
And it'll be a tough game for Maryland, like you said, Brendan, obviously, because teams in the past will have lost this one. But the Terps are looking to get their first Big Ten win of the season, Saturday at 3:30. Maryland soccer came home and played the other Michigan team, the Wolverines, and tied them 2-2. Brendan, they're 1-2-2, 5 games in. What have you seen so far from Sasha's team?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't win and they didn't lose, so I don't really know how to look at that. The big thing I wanted to look at, 5 games in, only 1 win. Not being able to finish some of those games against teams you should be able to win against. Michigan up 2-1 midway through the second half. That's a game they should be able to put away. Game gets tied. Red card late in the second half, about 10 minutes to go. And then after that point, late in the game, it's hard to try to want to score a goal because if you press up too much on offense, you have one less player. It's a recipe for disaster. So as soon as the red card went out, Maryland played a little bit more passive. Max Riley was still trying to will them to get offensive chances, but with one less guy, it was just not that easy. So took the tie against Michigan. Not totally bad, but going to have to step up coming into the next big slate of Big Ten play. The one thing I did want to point out, the last time Maryland started 1-2-2 was in 2018, and that was the year they won the championship. We saw this with Indiana last year. Teams that get hot near the end of the season often do very well in soccer. Do I think this is the 2018 team? Absolutely not. But it does show some promise.
Yeah, I think that was a good way to describe it, because I think that as you kind of move through Big Ten play, they're clearly still gelling, clearly still coming together. So you would expect to see results improved, and you would think that they will be able to compete in the Big Ten. Women's soccer didn't really show much of that. Tough game, Mike. Lost to Penn State 4-0. What do you think of Megan Ryan Nemzer's squad? That was kind of a humbling piece of pie after winning 3 straight games, and we were hyping them up a little bit.
It's important to remember that this team is still in a rebuilding program right now. They're going to lose games. They're not expected to be one of the top Big Ten teams this year. So, like you said, it was a humbling performance.
Yeah, I think that as you kind of look at this team, Brendan, another tough game for the offense. No goals scored. Really just kind of lifeless at all times. What can Nemzer do to maybe kind of give them an offensive spark?
To be fair, they lost to Penn State, top 10 team in the country. It's still tough to go out there and not score any goals. I think Purdue coming to town on Thursday will be a much better test of kind of where they stand in the Big Ten. A game that they could possibly get a win out of. I think if Maryland wins that game, you'll see a team that can probably have a semi-successful Big Ten slate. But if you're looking for their first Big Ten win in game 3, 4, or 5, it's going to be tough.
I just want to say it's a bad offensive performance against a good Big Ten team, but 2 shots on goal is not acceptable. Like, to be able to just, if you're Nemzer, like, no matter what, if once you fall down 2-3-0, you're trying to attack, and to only get 2 shots, not great. But I think they could bounce back this week against them.
Yeah, I was at practice one of the days for women's soccer, shooting for a package I'm working on. Needless to say, they were talking a lot about how Penn State's defense had a lot of taller defenders, and it was going to make it tough to generate chances. So they knew what they were going up against, and so in some ways it almost makes it worse that they couldn't get it done.
Definitely, and you got to really win one of these coming up soon, and that was a tough weekend. And Maryland will have to recover, and field hockey, they're on the other side of the spectrum, Mike.
They recovered.
They beat the 6th team in the country, which Maryland soccer did not do.
Opposite.
How did that happen? How did they take down another Virginia team, the Cavaliers?
Yeah, the field hockey team just recovered from a loss of their own. They just defeated number 6 Virginia 2-0. Had a very strong game off of goalkeeper Alyssa Klobosco. 7 saves from her. They did fall 3-2 Thursday against Princeton. It was their 2nd loss of the season. Princeton is a good program, beat the Terps before, but that was also their 2nd win of the season, and now they're 2-4. So you got to look for Maryland to explode against competition that isn't exactly top tier, and that that loss kind of echoed in the issue of the offense not being able to execute. In their loss against Duke earlier in the year, they only had 2 shot attempts in the second half. In this game against Princeton, they only had 7 shots in the second half, opposed to 11 in the second quarter alone. So you got to look for that offense to be more explosive, and good performances by the goalkeeper, which they saw tonight.
Definitely, and that was a huge win from a Hawk squad. Get them back on track after a tough loss to Princeton. Mike, I said they'd go 1-0 or 1-1 and be a good week. You kind of shot back at me. I just want to point out they did go 1-1.
Well,
you were hyping them up.
Like I was saying, for the field hockey team, they're just that good. They expect to win 2. I respect Missy Maharg squad.
Yeah, they couldn't do the 2, but they got the 1. So big win for them, and they'll kind of head into some more action here coming up soon. Opening Big Ten play this week with big matches against Rutgers and Penn State. Another team that started Big Ten play, Brendan, volleyball squad, back is the league that is dominating pretty much across the country.
Big Ten play will kick off for women's volleyball this week, but Maryland 10-2 in non-conference play. That is a huge success for the program. Maryland's best start since 2021, where they went 13-0, but 7-3 in conference play. So you can still kind of see incredible non-conference performance, but no matter how well they do, they're going to struggle in Big Ten play. 6 straight games going into Big Ten play, coming in with momentum. Beat FGCU in 3-2. The rest of the games this weekend, they won in straight sets. The big highlight from this season, Sam Sire recorded her 100th kill.
Mm-hmm. Big Sam Sire W, and that was a huge way to put her in the records book.
Maryland will kick off Big Ten play at home against Purdue. Absolutely a winnable game. Just going to point out, Big Ten rankings haven't been updated from last week, but 6 teams in the top 20. Ohio State 19th, Purdue 17th, Penn State 13th, Minnesota 9th, Nebraska 4th, and Wisconsin 1st. We've seen Maryland beat some of those ranked teams. I think they'll be able to get a couple wins against ranked teams this year, but they're going to have to play complete 5 great sets.
Definitely, and they got a chance to do that coming up soon. So we'll see what happens. And that was a good week of Maryland sports overall. Solid program. But we're going to have a little bit of a segment here, gentlemen. Want this to be kind of a quick hit. Give me one stock up or stock down from the entire Maryland athletic department over the last week. Brendan, you want to start?
I'll take the obvious answer. I think it's the NIL collective. We've talked a ton about NIL on this podcast. If you didn't see it, Maryland basically combined all of their different collectives into the one Maryland collective. You probably, what is this guy saying? One Maryland. The name of the collective is the One Maryland Collective. So they put it all together. I think that's going to be a much better way for Maryland athletics to distribute the collective money they're getting. Obviously, fans are going to want to see it go to a lot of the big name sports like football, because that's what people care about a lot. So wins in those sports matter. But at the end of the day, doing that and combining the NIL collective into the one collective is going to spread the wealth, which is a massive positive for Maryland athletics.
Most definitely. And I think you all could just learn more about NIL in general by checking out our NIL episode, one of our top episodes we did last year. So give it a listen. Mike, stock up, stock down.
Colby McDonald, running back on the football team. So against Virginia, he had 76 yards. 75 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. Watching these football games, Colby McDonald's kind of stood out because at times it seemed he's also had the ability to be the lead back for this team if Hemby ever went down. Not saying that would happen, but if that did, he has 166 yards and 2 touchdowns with 7.9 yards per carry. That looks pretty good for that running back depth on the team.
Definitely, and I think that's a huge addition for Maryland.
I'll do a quick stock down. I would say men's soccer team, the tie against Michigan. Bad luck.
Yeah, tough game for them. My stock up of the week, I'm going to give it to Tarheeb Still. 2 picks. Really kind of is just this versatile corner, plays slot, plays the outside. Big week. And then I'll do another quick hitter. I would say the field hockey team, just responding after a 6-0 or a loss to Princeton and then coming back and defeating the number 6 Virginia. So good win for them. Sam Sire also stock up. So that was our stocks up. Mike, you continue to rise in our rankings for our stocks.
And I continue to drop.
Take us through what happened.
Right, so the current standings as they are, I'm up at the top at 7-2, Sam at 5-4, and then Brendan at 3-5-1. Brendan, what's going on?
Is that good? Is 3-5-1 good? I don't know.
That tie might come into handy later for second place.
I don't know. I need a couple. I need 3 weeks. I need to be 9-0 in the next 3 weeks to have a chance, I think.
Would you like to start this week's picks?
You know what, Mike? I would love to start this week's picks. Have a fun one at the end, like always. First pick, I'm going to take Iowa plus 14 against Penn State. I didn't think Penn State looked incredible last weekend, and I think Iowa is going to play a pretty slow game and not going to let Penn State score that much, so I think 14 points is a lot. My next pick will be Washington minus 21 against Cal. Washington just blew out Michigan State. I think they have potential to do it again against Cal. Then I'm going to take UMass minus 2.5 against New Mexico. Here's my philosophy here. UMass could make a bowl game, all right? They have 1 win so far, and if you look at the ESPN percentages, they're favored percentage-wise to win in 4 of their remaining games. That means they need one upset to make a bowl game.
Go UMass.
And they're favored this weekend, which is ridiculous, and I don't believe it, so I'm going to pick them.
Go UMass. All right, are we going my side, Mike, or are we going to...
We can go circle. You can go.
Okay, so I'm going to take, with my picks, Michigan to not cover the Rutgers 25.5 spread. So I'm going to take Rutgers plus 25.5.
Is Harbaugh back?
He is. Then I'm going to take Utah minus 4.5. I like the Utes against UCLA at home. I feel like that's a type of game that those teams always tend to win. And then lastly, I'm going to take the Ohio State and Notre Dame under 54. I like that pick. So give me the under in the Buckeyes and Fighting Irish, which should be a great game.
All right, and to start my picks off, I'm going to take FSU minus 1.5 at Clemson. They haven't beaten the Tigers in 7 years, but I think this would be the Seminoles team to do that. Plus, we've seen it. Clemson's a little bit weaker this year. Obviously, they had that shocking loss to Duke to open the season. Next, Ole Miss Bama over 55. Ole Miss, they're always high scoring under Lane Kiffin with a questionable defense. And then you got Alabama. We know they can put points back up onto the board. Plus, they're coming off a pretty low scoring 17-point affair. So I think they're due for a high scoring one. And then lastly, Ohio State -3.5 at Notre Dame. Ohio State, they beat them 21-10 in last year's meeting. They've allowed only 6.6 points per game this year.
Definitely, and good picks, Mike. You are continuing to lead the way, so I can't criticize any of those. Brendan, I like actually your picks this week a lot. So,
well, that means they're all gonna be bad now. I said that. Appreciate it.
But that'll wrap up our picks, and that'll take us to our favorite segment, our last segment of the pod, Terrific Terp.
It's hard to imagine now, but not so long ago, there was water polo being played at the Division I level in College Park. Although the program was cut, it was still able to produce some professional level athletes. This week's Terrific Terp is Elizabeth Hopkins, who played water polo at Maryland from 2006 to 2009. Hopkins was born in Hawaii, but grew up in California, and it's fair to say that her family lived and breathed water polo. Her two brothers both played water polo in college. Jonathan played at UC San Diego, and Thomas played at Stanford. Her parents were athletes too. Her father played soccer in college, and her mother played volleyball. In high school, Hopkins was the captain of her tennis, swimming, and water polo teams. She is the Terps' all-time leader in career points, ranked second in shots and goals, and fourth in assists. She was selected twice to the first team All-Collegiate Water Polo Association Southern Division, CWPA for you fanatics out there, and helped lead UMD to a third-place finish at the CWPA Eastern Championship in 2009. Hopkins went on to play professionally in Barcelona.
Definitely an incredible story been doing lately. It's just been phenomenal each week. So that was another phenomenal episode.
I mean, it seems like the interviews keep getting better and better too. So we got to see what we can top ourselves next week.
Exactly. But thank you again for listening to Under the Shell presented by Testudo Times. I'm Sam. That's Mike. Brendan on my left. Thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your night.
Guess what? You've got Under the Shell podcast. Nobody does it better.